This is the sewing tutorial for the Swan Lace-Up Dress pattern, a light pullover summer dress with an open lace-up neckline and delicate flounces that resemble swan wings in motion. This dress carries a subtle ballet-inspired mood, light, graceful, and full of movement. It has a relaxed silhouette, but the back is gently shaped with an elasticated waist, so there's no need for a closure. That makes sewing easier and the dress especially comfortable for summer. I love that the front flounces extend slightly over the shoulders onto the back. For me, the wings are not only decorative, but also offer a bit of practical coverage, making this dress totally bra-free friendly. But this pattern also includes a higher neckline option. You can play around with the pattern and turn it into a cute top. As always, the link to the pattern is in the description below. Here's what you'll need besides the pattern: a lightweight fabric, something soft and drapey but not see-through. For this dress, I used a fine quality synthetic satin, thin with a nice drape but not easy for sewing. For the white version, I used a lightweight, slightly elastic cotton seersucker. For this top, I used cotton as well. And for the green one, I used a viscose crepe fabric. Just keep in mind, the wrong side of the fabric will show on the flounces, so double-faced fabric is a great choice. You'll also need some stay tape or fusible interfacing for the neckline and slit, and a bit of narrow elastic for the back. First, prepare your fabric and take note. The bodice pieces are symmetrical and should be cut from folded fabric. But some pieces, like the front skirt, however, are cut from a single layer. Note that this pattern includes two neckline options at the front, one higher and one deeper. Cut along the neckline line you prefer. Don't forget about the notches. Also note that the ties can be cut on the bias or on the straight grain, depending on your fabric. Transfer all notches and darts. Make notches along the center line on all pieces as well. On the back piece, there's a marked line inside the shoulder dart. Clip along that line 2.5 centimeters down the dart. Then, cut out the full dart on the paper pattern piece only, then outline the dart shape with chalk or a fabric pen onto the fabric back piece. Alternatively, you can do this later, right before sewing the back. The center front and its facing are two identical pieces, and both need to be interfaced along the neckline. Lay the pieces flat gently and avoid stretching it. I double-check to make sure the piece hasn't shifted when I open it. On the wrong side of both pieces, press a 1.5 cm wide strip of non-stretch interfacing or stay tape along the neckline edge. At the curved areas, clip the interfacing so it lies smoothly. So one is the center front piece, and the second is the facing piece. Now take the left and right front skirt pieces. On the wrong side, place a piece of interfacing measuring 1.9 by 3 cm over the slit notches. Press them to secure. This will reinforce the slit opening. Next, prepare the lacing string. You could cut the lacing either on the bias or on the straight grain. Both work well, so choose based on your fabric and skill level. If the bias is too tricky, go with the straight grain. Just note that a bias cut lacing will end up slightly narrower. No matter how you've cut your pieces, place the short diagonal ends of the two lacing pieces right sides together, like this. Stitch them to form one long strip. This piece will be used for both the neckline loops and the lace-up string. Press the seam open and trim the corners. Then fold the long edges of the strip 6 mm toward the center and press. If the strip was cut on the bias, using a bias tape maker can help. I even tried using this tool to press pieces that were cut not on bias, but on the straight grain, and it still worked. or simply fold it the regular way. Fold the strip in half again, enclosing the raw edges. Stitch close to the outer fold, about 1 or 2 millimeters from the edge. Press the lace in thoroughly. Notice that a diagonal seam like this is much less noticeable on ties than a straight across seam would be. Now let's prepare the neckline loops. Cut from the finished lacing strip 3.7 cm pieces. I'm making the deeper neckline version, so I need 11 of these loops. Make 7 for the higher neckline. Set the remaining strip aside for the lacing. Fold each small piece in half to create a loop. Place the loops along the neckline edge of the center front piece, aligning each loop to a notch. Match the raw edges of the loop with the neckline edge and stitch them in place 5 to 8 millimeters from the edge. Backstitch at each loop to secure. Here's a small trick. I first insert a needle through both ends of the loop to keep it in place, and only then I start backstitching so ends don't shift. Place the front facing and the center front piece right sides together. We will be stitching along these edges, but from the front piece. You can mark the seam allowance next to the corners to help figure out the pivot points for neat corners. Stitch the neckline with the 1 cm seam allowance, enclosing the loops between the layers. It's important to stitch from the center front side and not the facing, because this way the loops will sit more cleanly in the seam. Clip the seam allowance at curved sections and corners. Be careful not to cut into the stitching. To make turning the piece easier and cleaner, I first press the seam open. This method also works well in other situations where you need to turn a piece. It helps the edge flip smoothly into place. I do the same on this small lower section as well. Turn everything right side out and press again so that the loops face inward and the facing is hidden from the front. As you can see, the right side looks cleaner than the facing on the seam allowance. You can also press the corners from the inside, between the layers, to reduce any visible seam allowance ridges showing through on the right side. If the loops are still showing through, you can press it from the right side over something soft, like a fluffy blanket. Stay stitch the back neckline 2 to 4 millimeters from the edge to prevent stretching during sewing. Also, let's stay stitch the curved armholes at once. As you can see, since we stabilized the edges, they won't stretch out. And because the stitching is placed very close to the edge, it will be fully covered by the bias binding. Here's how I finished the neckline and armholes using bias binding. It's a quick method I like to use. But feel free to choose any method that works well for you and suits your fabric. Prepare the neckline bias strip by pressing the long edges toward the center, similar to what we did for the lacing piece, but here fold one side slightly more than the other. The small offset helps to ensure that the bottom fold of the bias binding gets caught in the seam when I stitch. With the right side facing up, place the bias strip over the neckline so the raw edge aligns with the fold. The shorter folded edge should be facing up. Stitch along this edge, ensuring the longer edge is caught on the wrong side. Trim the ends of the binding to clean up the neckline finish. Go slowly, working in short sections. On curved areas, follow the curve with your stitching. Don't try to straighten the bias. I find this method simple and effective, and the finish looks very neat from the right side. The best part, there's no need to baste, but it's important to prepare the piece carefully before sewing. Trim the ends of the binding to clean up the neckline finish. Now begin assembling the bodice. Separate the facing from the center front piece. I mark the facing that will end up on the wrong side. We won't be working with it just yet. For now, we're only assembling the right side, and with the right sides together, align the center front shoulder with the back shoulder. It's important that the neckline edge is aligned precisely at the 1 cm seam line. Stitch that part of the shoulder seam. Now trim the seam allowance corner. Wrap the front facing around the shoulder seam, enclosing the back piece between the layers. Stitch the shoulder seam part again. Trim the corner near the neckline. Turn the piece right side out and press. The shoulder seam should now be enclosed. I love that way of a shoulder finish, so neat from the both sides. Now top stitch the neckline, starting at the shoulder seam, 5 to 7 mm from the edge. Try to align beautifully this stitch line with the bias neckline stitch line on the shoulder. use the presser foot as a guide. Mine is 5 mm wide. Make sure the loops are pulled out and that the wrong side isn't visible. Align the front piece with its facing, wrong sides together, and press. Stitch along the edges 5 to 7 mm from the edge. From this point, treat these layers as one. Trim the excess seam allowance to smooth out the line. Attach the side front piece to the remaining free shoulder of the back. Right sides together. Stitch and finish the seam with an overlocker or zigzag. Press this seam towards the front. Prepare the armhole bias strips the same way as for the back neckline, folding the edges toward the center with a slight offset. Finish both armholes in the same way, starting at the side edge near the armpit and enclosing the shoulder seam neatly inside the binding. This method is much easier than pre-measuring and attaching a closed bias loop after sewing the side seam, but feel free to use that method if you like to. Press the finished armholes well, trim any remaining ends of the bias tape. Next, prepare and attach the flounces. I marked the wrong side right away to avoid mixing things up and accidentally making two identical flounces. To finish the curved edge, we will be using a narrow roll hem. Set the machine to a small stitch length around 2 mm. Fold the edge to the wrong side by 4 to 6 mm and stitch 1 mm from the fold. Work in small sections, holding the fold in place as you sew. I navigate by my presser foot again. Press from the wrong side, then carefully trim the excess fabric near the stitching. Fold the edge again, enclosing the raw edge. Stitch close to the fold, using the presser foot as a guide to keep the line even. The second line of stitching should go exactly on top of the first one, or just slightly further from the edge to make sure the raw edge is fully enclosed. Here's how it looks on a lighter fabric, very delicate and pretty. Repeat this process for the straight section of the flounce. Don't backstitch at the corners, instead leave thread tails and tie them off. On one of the flounces, it might be tricky to start stitching right at the corner where there are multiple layers, so here's a little trick. I gently pull the thread tails to help the fabric feed under the presser foot more easily. This makes it much easier to start the seam cleanly. Then I tie a small knot with those threads to finish the corner neatly. And this is how neat the corners look from the right side. Now we have to attach the flounce between the center front and side front pieces. The flounce will be attached 1.5 centimeters above the bottom edge. I mark that here. On the back, it will be sewn along the shoulder dart. You can take the paper pattern to refresh the dart point. The notch on the flounce is matching the shoulder seam. Then draw a line from the shoulder clip to that point. This will be your stitching guide for attaching the flounce. Pin the edge of the flounce along that drawn guideline. The end of the flounce should stop about 1.5 centimeters before the dart point. To attach the flounce, place the raw edge of one flounce along the raw edge of the center front piece, right sides together. The straight finished edge should be 1.5 centimeters above the waist. Match the notches on the flounce and bodice pieces. In this step, it may seem that the flounce is a little shorter, however, it is not. This is because the edge is shorter than the actual seam line, as the flounce is cut as a circle. So clip the seam allowance of the flounce in a few places to help it match with the front piece edge. Don't cut through the entire seam allowance, only about 5 mm deep, and let's attach the flounce. We'll attach the flounce in two separate steps, along the back and the front individually. On the front side, you can stitch the flounce about 9 mm from the edge, so that later you can sew the side front piece with a 1 cm seam allowance without overlapping the stitching line. Once you reach the shoulder, stitch the free end of the flounce along the shoulder dart center line 1 mm from the edge. Stop 1.5 centimeters before the dart point. This is how these stitch lines look. Please ignore that the armholes appear unfinished here in the video. Align the side front piece over the bodice right sides together with the flounce sandwiched in between. Match notches and shoulder seams. Stitch with 1 cm seam allowance on tapering off towards the dart point. Finish the seam with an overlocker and finish the thread tail on the dart. I finished the overlocker tails by pulling out the 2 looper threads and tightening them. Press darts and seam allowance toward the side. Avoid pressing the flounce directly. Work from the side front piece and press the seam allowance only. This is what we should have right now. Make sure the back darts are equal. Place the front and back right sides together and stitch the side seams. Try to align bias edge as perfect as possible. Finish the side seam allowances with an overlocker or zigzag stitch, working from the front side. Finish the thread tails on the armhole by tying off the loop threads or inserting the braid of overlocker threads into the seam using a large needle. Press the side seams towards the back. Reinforce the underarm seam by backstitching at the armhole parallel to the side seam, 5 mm away from the seam. Make sure you catch the side seam allowance only and that the side seam allowance is not visible from the right side. Let's move on to the skirt. Here are the 2 front skirt pieces, and we'll start by making the slit. Fold the entire center front edge of both pieces to the wrong side by 5 mm and press. It's a very similar method to the one I use in my Sunbelle skirt pattern. Check that out too. With right sides together, stitch the center front seam 6 mm from the edge from the waist down to the slit notch, ignoring the folded edges. Make several additional backstitches at the slit opening to reinforce the seam. Press the stitched seam open, keeping the pre-folded edges in place. Now we need to top stitch the folded edges and at the same time finish the open edges of the slit. This is done with just one line of stitching on each side of the skirt from the wrong side. You can start finishing the slit first or begin with the top stitch at the upper section. It means you'll be stitching on the left skirt piece side from the waist down and on the right skirt piece from the bottom up. In this case, we're starting from the bottom on the right front skirt piece, working from the wrong side. Fold the edge over 6 mm one more time and begin top stitching 5 mm from the edge, all along the open slit. Don't stretch the edge. Pay close attention when transitioning from the slit to the upper seam. Make sure the stitch line is smooth and stays at an even distance. Continue top stitching 5 mm from the front seam, making sure you catch the folded edges. For the left front skirt, working from the wrong side, top stitch 5 mm from the seam. Continue top stitching along the open slit. Fold the edge over 6 mm one more time and stitch. At the slit opening, stitch a few reinforcing stitches perpendicular to the seam. Press the seam and the slit edges. When pressing the slit edges, align both edges carefully. Check from the bottom to make sure the ends of the slit are even and that one side hasn't stretched out. If needed, you can trim the bottom slightly to even it out. And that's how we get a neat slit. I really like this method because it looks so clean from both the right and wrong sides. So let's assemble the skirt and attach it to the bodice. Place the front and back skirt pieces right sides together and sew the side seams. Never pull or stretch the skirt edges while stitching, especially if the edge is cut on the bias or close to the bias grain. Finish the seam allowances with an overlocker or a zigzag stitch. Press the seams toward the back. Align the skirt to the bodice, matching side seams, the front and back centers, and the slit to the left front seam. Stitch the waist seam. Finish the seam allowance from the skirt side, press the seam toward the bodice. Cut a piece of elastic according to your size. Mark 4 cm from the both side seams. Match the center of the elastic with the center back of the dress and pin it to the back waist seam allowance only. We'll start attaching it here. Using the straight or zigzag stitch, sew the elastic in place. Begin and end 4 cm away from the side seams, stretching the elastic as you sew. The elastic helps gently shape the waist and adjust it, but keep in mind, if you make it too tight, the back of the dress may start to sit awkwardly. This design isn't meant to be tightly fitted, it has a relaxed fit and softly defined waist. So reducing the waist by one size with the elastic is fine. But if you need to take it in more than that, it's better to adjust the side seams instead. To hem the skirt, fold the bottom edge 5 mm to the wrong side and press. Fold again by 6 mm and stitch near the first fold, just as we've done with the slit. Press the hem. That's it. Sewing is finished. The final step is to thread the lacing through the neckline loops. And as you might remember, the lacing string can be made either on the bias or on the straight grain. In my case, I ended up using the bias cut version, so thread the remaining lacing string through the loops, starting from the center bottom loop. You can divide the lacing evenly into 2 equal lengths or make one side longer than the other. That's completely up to you. I use a small pair of blunt scissors to thread it through. You can also use tweezers or a pin, but I've found this way quick and convenient. Cross the ends as you move upward. Also make sure the crisscrossing of the lacing stays consistent along the neckline so that the same side always goes over on top. Tie the string ends securely and trim any excess. Alternatively, you can fold the ends twice and stitch them down. I made my first dress from this pattern many years ago, and I still wear it to this day. So this design has truly stood the test of time, so I decided to share the pattern with you too. So I hope you'll love it just as much as I do. It's such a perfect lightweight option for summer. If you've already made this dress, since the pattern has been out for a while, let me know if the tutorial made things clearer. I'd really appreciate your support. Leave a like, a comment, or just say hi. It means a lot, especially now when things are a bit quiet on my YouTube. Thank you for watching.